everybody wants to get the monitor, right? They want the monitor, it looks great. They want the printer, looks impressive. I find that people in photography many oftentimes suffer from something that I call gas. I think it's a pretty common term now. We call it gear acquisition syndrome. And people want all the stuff that's going to make them look cool. But the reality is, if you're going to make a print on a piece of paper, the most important thing you really need to think about is paper. And as you can see behind me, I talk about paper a lot, and I think it's the most exciting part of this process, and it allows you to create a unique artistic signature in your work more than anything else. So, and it is the art part of this whole process, is making that decision. So, so the factors to consider when you're thinking about paper are, number one, what type? We have basically two types of paper. One I call general purpose, photo grade, which are all your resin coated papers and your inexpensive matte papers. And then you have fine art papers. Fine art papers are always going to give you better quality images. They're going to have more depth, more dimension, more three-dimensional. And when you start factoring in things like surface texture and base tone, whether it's a cool paper or warm paper, you could talk about papers that have what I would call a more exotic pulp beyond cotton, right? We have bamboo and kozo and hemp and agave and sugarcane and all sorts of other papers are made out of all sorts of things. Then there's the thickness of the paper, right? How does it feel in your hand? That's measured in mils or microns. We'll talk a bit about that. And then there's branding, right? People ask me about many off brands of paper and versus a Canson or a Hahnemuhle or a Moab or a name brand, right? And that ends up being part of your branding. And then of course, papers available in sheets and rolls, some in small sheets, some in larger, there's every brand has kind of a mix of what papers are available and what. Some papers are available from 4x6 all the way up to 60-inch rolls. Some of them aren't in small sheets. But sometimes, for instance, I'll have labs that say, I don't want to bring a paper in unless it's available in 60-inch rolls because I don't want to get somebody started on a product that is only going to be up to 44 inches. So sometimes that's a determining factor. Weight, grams per square meter, we will talk about that. To me, an irrelevant number. It doesn't mean anything, yet it's on every single box of paper. And then it's all based on personal taste. So I'm going to kind of quickly go through some examples of what these papers are, so to start getting yourself familiar with them. So in the photo grade general purpose resin coated paper category, this would be papers that are glossy, luster, pearl, could even be metallic, right? So we have our Arista 2 photo grade luster. We also have it as a glossy. We have the same type of papers also in a metallic version, so they have like a little shimmer to them. Canson Infinity, also, all these brands have like a glossy and a luster, but Canson also has this interesting paper called Photo Satin Premium RC that's very smooth, and the ink on the paper has no texture. So when we talk about a luster paper, that would be more like Kodak's E surface, right? Glossy would be like Kodak F. This is the only paper I've really found that is like Kodak N surface. And by the way, these are all images that I've taken and printed on these papers. And when I do my very famous World of Inkjet paper presentation, I literally have a portfolio where all of these images, I have over 200 prints, all printed 11 by 17. And when I do that presentation, you get to touch and feel all these papers. So Epson, this is Epson Premium Photo Paper Glossy. You also have luster and semi-gloss and other papers. Hahnemuhle has a glossy, a pearl, and a luster. Ilford also has a smooth gloss, through smooth pearl, and then This is Moab Slick Rock Pearl. So Moab, when they call it their Slick Rock Pearl, is really a glossy resin coated paper, but it's metallic and it has a bit of a shimmering quality to the base. So they call it based on, they kind of call it out based on the pearlescent quality of the base. So these are all images that when I shoot, I'm thinking about what paper I'm going to print on. So I very much think of paper as part of my composition on every image that I create. So in addition to general purpose resin coated papers, there's also inexpensive matte papers. And some of these are single-sided, some of them are double-sided. So this is our Arista 2 Duo Matte. Arista 2 is our private label brand. Arista is a registered trademark of Freestyle. So if you ever see product out there in the world under the Arista name in the photo industry, it's not part of Arista Records. It is our registered trademark. So we do have a double-sided matte paper that's relatively heavyweight. This is my badass squirrel from St. James Park in London who dared me to take his picture. We also have a double weight matte paper. So this would be a single-sided paper. And when I'm talking about single-sided and double-sided means you could print on both sides. Single-sided means there's only one side that's coated for inkjet to accept the ink. And if you print on the wrong side of like a resin-coated paper, we've all done it. I've done it. The ink goes on the back and it kind of looks like a Van Gogh painting and the ink never dries. It's kind of cool, but not necessarily what you're going for. So you got to be careful as to which side's which. Same thing with matte papers, and those papers are a little harder to determine what the printable side is. You'd like to think that the manufacturers put the paper face up in the box, or at least, they have a little note in there that says print this side up. Well, every once in a while, paper goes in upside down. So I have two tests that I do. One is a Post-it note test. So you take a Post-it note and the stick them on the back of the note. You put it on both sides of the paper. It will generally stick more to the side of the paper that's coated for inkjet. And then the other test that I do is I simply touch the corner of the paper to the inside of my lip, and the moisture of my lip will stick to the coated side of the paper, usually. We also have a Arista Duo Matte Lightweight. So this would be a very thin paper coated both sides. And here's Arista Ultra Premium Presentation Paper Matte, which is very popular as an inexpensive matte paper. Hanamuli has a photo matte paper that is part of their range that is kind of an entry-level range into their brand. None of these are fine art papers. So all of these resin-coated and matte papers, these are inexpensive papers. You can get a photographically realistic image on them, but if you go to a gallery or a museum, they're generally going to, if you show them your prints on these papers, they're going to feel them and they're going to go, you know what, why don't you come back when you have a real piece of paper, right? They can't sell these papers to collectors. They're not archival. They contain optical brighteners. They're all made out of alpha cellulose and not a high quality alpha cellulose. So the paper is going to break down over time. The ink may not fade because the ink, that we're using in these archival pigment printers will last a long time, but the paper will break down. So these are papers that people will use to proof. They'll use them to hand out images to their family and friends, but you're not going to necessarily, take them to portfolio reviews and sell them to galleries and museums. So now,
sorry, Eric, you have a few more questions regarding paper and paper profiles. Do you want to answer them now?
Let me get through the paper part and then we'll answer them, because some of those questions might be answered. So now we're going to get to the fine art papers, right? So we're going to jump into that now. And I also call these papers transformational. And the reason is that you're always going to get better quality out of these papers. And when I do my presentations on paper, I have images that I printed on a resin coated paper versus a fine art paper. And you can see that the depth and dimension is there. So the first category I want to talk about is what we call Baryta papers, Baryta. Now, Baryta is one of the most mispronounced words we have in our vocabulary that we use to talk about paper. So all it means is that the paper has barium sulfate in it. That's what it means. It's barium sulfate. And the correct pronunciation is in fact Baryta. Now, some people will call it Baryta. Some people call it Baryita. Some people call it Barda. I've even heard Baryita. They kind of give a little Harry Potter thing in it. And then some people just give up and call it burrito. But the correct pronunciation is in fact Baryta. And so, but it doesn't tell me anything. So when I have people that say, well, I use a Baryta paper, it doesn't help me. So for instance, Canson Baryta Photographic 2, it's an alpha cellulose base, high quality alpha cellulose, not going to break down as fast as the cheap papers, but that's wood pulp. It's got a very smooth surface. It's very white. It has Baryta and a kind of a little bit of optical brightener in it. Now they have Baryta Photographic 2 matte. This is the first matte paper with a Baryta coating. It has no reflectivity from any angle. It's really a very interesting paper. Also very white, but it's a very matte surface, very different from Baryta Photography 2. Then there's Hahnemühle Photo Rag Baryta. So this is now 100% cotton rag base. It's got a semi-gloss or luster surface, more of a semi-gloss, I think. It's, you know, when you start talking about surface, every paper's got kind of its own characteristic, but this is a gorgeous paper. It doesn't have any optical brighteners in it. Then we have Fine Art Baryta from Hahnemühle, very different paper. So Photo Rag with the little registered trademark, that means it's 100% cotton in Hahnemühle's language. And if you see the word fine art, all one word with a capital F and capital A, that means the base is alpha cellulose. And this is a very white paper, still has barium sulfate, but also has optical brighteners in it. It's also the paper that I would say when people come to me and say, I want a print that looks like a black and white wet darkroom print, this is the paper that comes closest to the look and feel of like an Ilford multigrade fiber-based print. It also has a little bit of a slight kind of texture to the paper, which is interesting. And again, these are all images that when I shot these images, I knew what paper I was going to print them on. So here's another paper from Hahnemühle, a Baryta paper, Fine Art Baryta, just like the other one you see to the left of it, but it's satin and it's warm. And the paper surface is very smooth, semi-gloss. I mean, these 5 papers are all really super different from each other. And then here's the last one. This is Moab Juniper Baryta Rag, 100% cotton, very warm, not really, it doesn't have a lot of shine to it, very different surface. So here's 6 papers with the word Baryta in it, and they're all very, very different. So I'm going to kind of click through these really quick. Here's 100% smooth cotton matte papers. So matte papers don't have any reflectivity. Our Arista 100% cotton fine art papers, we have natural and bright white having optical brighteners in it, natural white with no optical brighteners. We also have it in a 210 GSM version and a 330 GSM version. The 210 being, in fact, lighter weight than the 330. Canson Infinity, this is Arch 88. This is one of my new favorite 100% cotton matte papers from Canson. It is a very, very white paper without the use of optical brighteners. Canson has figured out how to make papers really white without OBAs. And yes, I keep on talking about OBAs. We're going to get to that. Epson Hot Press Bright White, a very smooth matte paper with optical brighteners. And when you see Arch 88 next to Epson in an environment where there's UV light, you'll see the Epson is brighter, but when you take it out of that, the Arch 88 ends up being brighter, which is one of the things I really like about it. And it came out about, 8 months ago, mid last year. And it's really, the Arch 88 is gaining in popularity simply because it is a very white paper without optical brighteners. And Arch 88, by the way, Canson now owns the famous Arch mill in France. Canson has their own mill in Annonay, France, where they make Canson edition etching and other fine art papers. They both Hahnemühle and Canson, by the way, have been around for over 500 years. So they have a very long standing tradition in fine art paper making. And Arch 88 is actually a fine art silk screening paper that they've adapted and made for accepting inkjet ink. So you can actually buy the same paper to do all sorts of other things with if you're doing silk screening and drawing and etching, and some people use it for historical processes and all that kind of stuff. So you can buy it uncoated as a fine art paper, and then you can buy it as Canson Infinity, which has a coating that accepts inkjet ink. Hahnemühle Photorag Ultra Smooth, very, very popular, very, very smooth paper, the smoothest of all the papers we have. Ilford also has Smooth Cotton Rag, which is a beautiful paper, 100% cotton, no optical brighteners, super sharp inkjet receiving layer on it. And then, of course, Moab has Entrada Rag, which is available as a bright white, a natural white, also available in a 190 or 300 GSM. And if you get rolls of it, there's a single-sided version because all the other versions are double-sided, single-sided versions available in 290. So that's just and these are just brief. I mean, we've got over 200 papers available. So I've kind of chosen the highlights from the various brands in each of these categories. So now we're getting into 100% cotton, medium and heavily textured papers. So here's museum etching, very, very popular, one of the heaviest papers we have at 350 GSM. It's warm. It does not have any optical brighteners. It's got a beautiful texture. It was actually created in conjunction with a very famous landscape nature photographer named Stephen Johnson, who had a hand in its production. Canson has several papers with texture. This is Arch's BFK Reeves Pure White. BFK Reeves being a very, very famous fine art paper. If you print on this paper, there are people out there in the world, in the art world, that go, wow, you're using BFK Reeves? I know that paper. It's one of the most well thought of art papers in the world. It's available in a pure white version. And it's also available in a just what they call white, which is what we would consider more of a normal non-OBA paper-based white. Here's Hahnemühle Photorag Satin. When I took this image, I know it was going on this paper. This is kind of an unusual paper in that it is matte. It accepts matte ink, but the ink has a bit of a reflectivity to it when you look at it at an angle. So it's technically also part of Hahnemühle's glossy photo range of papers. If you look on their website, this paper is not under the matte range category. It's under glossy, even though it is a matte paper and it uses matte ink. But it was the perfect paper to print this image on. It's William Turner, one of the most famous papers we have, very warm, very heavily textured. It has the texture of 80 grit sandpaper. And again, when I took this image of this after hours depository Dropbox, I knew exactly what paper I was going to print it on. This texture is integrating with the texture in the wall. It's making the box seem smooth by comparison. It is as three-dimensional in real life as it is, as you see on your computer screen. Then there's Canson Arch Aquarelle, also a very heavily watercolor textured paper, but it is also very, very white. So Canson has included their pure white technology in this paper. And here's another after hour depository Dropbox in Silver City, New Mexico. you got to really search for these things. These are the only two I've taken pictures of. I got to get out more and actually find them because they obviously used to all be on the sides of bank buildings, but those are generally have been taken out and replaced by ATMs. And now they're on the sides of buildings that used to be bank buildings. So you got to kind of hunt for them. And then this is the last in this range, which is that I want to show, which is the BFK Reeves White. So it's got the same texture as the BFK Reeves Pure White, but is not as bright a white. It's more of what we would consider our traditional non-OBA white. And then we have papers that have more of an exotic base to them than 100% cotton. All the papers I've shown in these past couple of categories were all 100% cotton. Hahnemühle has a natural range of product of which consists of bamboo, hemp, agave, and sugarcane. So these I would consider more exotic. They're designed specifically to be more friendly to the environment. They either by using less water or by the speed in which they grow. This is part of their Green Rooster initiative, which is part of their range to produce product pulp from that's either like in the case of agave is reclaimed from tequila production. Hemp, for no pun intended, grows like a weed. Bamboo left unchecked, that stuff it'll grow 3 feet a day. They just keep on whacking it off and keeps on growing back. So it grows very rapidly under the right conditions, and so does sugarcane. So these are 4 papers that are very, very interesting. And certainly I have companies that are very environmentally conscious. And even though the cotton that the manufacturers use, that cotton is a reclaimed product. These are even better for the environment, or at least less harmful for the environment than cotton is. And then Moab has this paper that's actually made by Awagami for them called Moen Copy Unryu, which is at the base from this paper and this other paper from Awagami. This is made, the pulp is made from kozo. Kozo is a Japanese mulberry tree bark that they literally strip the bark from the tree. They create the pulp out of it, and then it grows back. So the tree isn't destroyed in the process. So it's very environmentally friendly. It's also a very durable fiber. And we have papers that are very thick. And then we have also papers that are very thin and translucent. It's a very, very interesting range of product. And the images on these types of papers look very different than our traditional Western images. So just want to quickly just talk about this concept of optical brighteners that I've been ranting on about from time to time. So optical brightener agents, or OBAs, when they're in a paper, their purpose is to make the paper appear whiter, or when technically what's happening is when a UV light hits the paper, it reflects a bluer light. So it's very dependent upon the light you're viewing it under in terms of what it looks like. So there are some people that say, if a paper contains optical brightener OBAs, you can't call it archival. Now, not everybody says that, but some people do, because first of all, there's no definition in our industry as to what the word archival means. We all have kind of a conceptual idea of what it means, but the reality is there's nothing that says, if a paper is this, you can now call it archival. There are various levels of permanence. And for me, a paper that does not have optical brighteners is more archival than a paper that does, because if the paper does have optical brighteners, we know at some point they're going to fade over time. I mean, just look at every photograph in all of your shoe boxes, right? If it's from the 70s, 80s, or 90s, the base is yellow. And the reason is that the optical brighteners in the base have failed. The dyes and the colors have failed. They tend to go magenta or cyan, right? So our color prints in the dark room were never really designed for archival permanence, yet we value them still. So for me, this issue of OBA, for some people, it's a big deal. For other people, they're like, I just like the way the paper looks. Now, to me, it has to do with that word predictability and control. So the reality is that a paper with optical brighteners will only look whiter if it's under UV light. To me, the whole point of discussing this is glass or plexiglass that you're using to present your print under. So I have this example here of Entrada, Moab Entrada Rag Bright White and Entrada Rag Natural. Now, the bright white, if a paper has the word bright in it, it definitely has optical brighteners. And the issue for me is this: I have very famous photographers that have come to me and say with absolute confidence that I'm printing on Epson Hot Press Bright White or Entrada Rag Bright White or Hanamili Photo Rag Bright White. I'm like, okay, why are you doing that? And they go, because I like the white point. I'm like, okay, how are you framing your print? And they go, well, I'm using museum glass. Like, really? So museum glass from TrueView or Optia, which is a UV coated plexiglass, is designed to block 99% of UV light. So when you put a piece of that glass over a print with optical brighteners, it looks just like the natural white paper, right? So you're making your print look yellow. So that's the main issue that I have with OBAs, is that it's a false white and it only looks white if the print is being viewed under UV light. Otherwise, it changes dramatically. And for me, I would rather use a paper without optical brighteners than with. Oh, now that I did that, I can't, there we are. Okay. So here's an example, two papers. The one on the bottom is Canson Aquarelle, no optical brighteners. You see I'm using an LED UV flashlight, and you can see the white reflecting off of the board on the back, but not the paper. Whereas the image on the top, that's Hanamili Photorag Bright White, and you can see my UV LED flashlight is reflecting off of both the paper and the board. So you're seeing how that UV light is reflecting off of the paper surface. Okay, so GSM. GSM means weight and not thickness. And this is kind of a big deal because every single box of paper has a number and the letters GSM on. Now, most people don't know what that means. So technically, what GSM is, it's called grams per square meter. It is the weight of the paper. It is not the thickness of the paper. The thickness is measured in mils or microns. So a mil is 1/1000th of an inch. Micron is 1/1000th of a millimeter. Now, GSM is how much it weighs. And so when people will ask me about paper, they'll say, well, I want to see your selection of 310 GSM thick papers. Well, wrong question, right? GSM is just the weight. And the reason why I use these two papers as an example is that the Ilford Smooth Pearl is a resin-coated paper, and it feels much thinner than Innova Fabriano printmaking rag, which is a 100% cotton paper. Cotton papers have fibers that are woven like a fabric, and they feel heavier. And when I show people these two images or these two prints and they feel them, it's a stunning when people say, oh my God, these two papers feel totally different. And when we're feeling papers, we call that the hand of the paper, right? So to me, it's important to feel the paper and see the paper before you actually purchase the paper. This way you kind of know what you're getting into. You can't tell by the box what's in there at all. So we have done something to help on our website. We have a World of Inkjet paper comparison chart, and it's a comprehensive listing of every paper we carry. It's searchable and sortable, and it has the key features of each paper. We even continue to list discontinued papers because they're still out there and we want people to see those specifications. It also has ratings, and they're my ratings, and it's how I've rated similar papers against each other. So I'm not comparing a resin coated paper with 100% cotton paper, and I'm taking into account technical aspects, value, the price, and performance of the paper. So if you ever have any questions on the rating of the paper, let me know. It's my rating. If I click over on this link, it takes you right to our website. And so this is the listing. And let's say you want to see all the 310 GSM papers. You can click it once and it goes in order of from numerical order. You can go sorted lowest to highest, highest to lowest. And then you can go paper thickness. So you can do, in terms of mils, lowest to highest, highest to lowest. And you can see also that when you do the 310 GSM, for instance, let's go to some of those. Let's go to some of those papers. So you'll see that the 310 GSM papers do in fact have different thicknesses. And this surprises people. When I first came out with this chart, people were saying, hey, I love your chart, but all 310 GSM papers the same thickness. I go, no, it's not. They go, yeah, it is. I go, no, it's not. And then I start showing them the papers and they go, oh, wow, that feels totally different, right? So it's the density of the paper. It's how it's made. And then let's say you wanted to see all of the canned, well, let's say, here, we'll type in Baryta. So now you see all of the papers that have Baryta. I also list under the under the optical brightener column, if the paper has OBAs and Baryta or just Baryta by itself. So, and let's do a refresh on the page. So also under optical brighteners, you'll see if there's no check, the paper does not have optical brighteners, because it doesn't always say on the box. Generally on the box, a paper will say does not contain optical brighteners. It generally will not say does contain optical brighteners. So created this chart so you have an easy reference to be able to see some of these features. Okay, so let's go back to here. Okay, and then so I'll discuss this slide, then we can answer some questions real quick. So a lot of people ask me, well, what paper should I use? So we have a service that I have been doing for 10 years. It costs $99 and it is called an inkjet paper psychotherapy session. And whenever I say that, some people laugh and giggle. It is really what a description says. I do them remotely via Zoom for people all over the world. I also do them by appointment in a retail store. And it really does answer the question, what paper should I use? Some of you might have gone through this with me. And basically you would bring, if you're going to do it in a store, you make an appointment with me, you'll bring a file and then I will print it on the same printer, one printer, all with custom profiles on a bunch of different papers. And we will together discover which one you like the best. This is a very personal decision. Not everybody has the same taste. And people very much have a preconceived notion about what they think they like and don't like. Many people will come to me and say, I love matte papers. I love the feel of matte papers. But their work doesn't really look good on matte paper. It looks better on a semi-gloss paper, yet they never tried it because they never thought paper really mattered. To me, this is the most important part of the process, is understanding what paper you're going to print on. It's more than color management, it's more than your monitor, more than anything. It's what paper are you going to print on, and does it match your unique artistic signature. For me, like I said before, every image I take, I know what paper I'm going to print on, and it becomes part of my composition. I'm literally thinking paper, shadows, midtones, highlights, texture of paper. I'm creating an object in every image that I create. Okay, Janice. Questions?
Okay, there's quite a